Hello, welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is the second part of my Harry Potter special review, and in this part I want to talk about the first film, which is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So I think the standard of the acting by the young kids is actually not too bad at all. I think out of the three main children, Harry, Ron and Hermione, I think Harry actually has the easiest ride of it in this film in terms of the acting and the demands. I think that this film features pretty terrible CGI character models by today's standards. I think things have moved on so much in that regard that really this looks, very badly left behind. Particularly, I'm thinking of people on brooms. They looked pretty terrible. I think also that Chris Columbus has a very televisual directing style. The kindest thing you can really say about him is he put this tremendous cast together who really did turn out to be absolutely fantastic, and that was absolutely crucial. The second kindest thing you can say about him is that the first couple of Harry Potter films which he directed and then walked away suited him in as much as, particularly the emotionally simplistic tone of those opening films suited him very well. If he'd been given the Half-Blood Prince, I think Columbus would have come really badly unstuck. So this it's basically a bit of a fairground ride, really. Columbus does an okay job. He's a bit of a plodder. He keeps his head down, powers through. I think if you interpret more than is actually in this film, then that's great. But I suspect that quite a lot of stuff would potentially go over Christopher Columbus's head. I don't, he's not the most cerebral of directors, but he did, to give him his full credit, he put all the elements together, and that was absolutely crucial at these early stages. If they had been switching actors, so if, for example, Daniel Radcliffe had been Harry for 3 films, then they brought somebody else in, I really think it would have lost credibility. The fact that they've maintained that is in part down to Chris Columbus finding the right people to start with, and that's absolutely fantastic. So he put these child actors together and really an all-star cast of fantastic British talent, and the later directors were able to use them very effectively. So Quidditch, well, I think actually a bit sexist, but I think Quidditch reflects that women don't get sport. So J.K. Rowling, has created this game, bless her. But if you look at the actual game itself, it's a lovely idea, using the broomsticks. But actually, if you look at the game and the rules of the game, that's not a proper game. It's not. There's a lack of emphasis on sort of pragmatism and skill and strategy. It's it's a bit wishy-washy. Women don't know sport very well. So all in all, Sorcerer's Stone is fine. It's very limited, and it's an okay introduction to the Harry Potter world. It suits the fact the first book is apparently the most simplistic and the most childlike, and obviously it's aimed at younger children than some of the later ones. It's got a fantastic cast, so throughout the acting is fantastic. So we've got Robbie Coltrane, we've got Alan Rickman's in there, Maggie Smith, and loads of others as well. So yeah, it was the first film. It wasn't terribly ambitious. The CGI looks pretty naff, but it was not too bad. So fine. So let's move on to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So the cast of this one is actually even better than the first one. So they've added Jason Isaacs and Kenneth Branagh to to add that to any film sequel is absolutely remarkable in terms of talent. But they're both here as well as some of the fantastic people from the first one. I do quite enjoy the scenes with Harry and his horrible, Muggle family, which, featuring Richard Griffiths, who's fantastic, is just a horrible uncle. It's a bit of fun. I think in this film we get a sense of repetition. So the first film that we had the flying madcap broomsticks, this one we get a flying car, and actually that pattern continues. And actually, I know it's a bit whimsical and magical and stuff, but I don't really understand the significance. Why 1 minute a flying broom and then a flying motorbike with a sidecar? I don't really get that. So in this one, I really started to enjoy this sort of uniqueness and inventiveness of Rowling's work. The Mandrake, for example, was a really nice touch. I enjoyed that, and at times the magical stuff really starts to come into its own in this one. Plot-wise, I think the Chamber of Secrets is a lot stronger as well than the first one, and it's a lot more involving than its predecessor. We get the introduction of Dobby, who's a house elf, which I think is an interesting idea itself. Dobby, in my mind, is played a bit too wacky and zany and a bit too irritating for my taste, to be perfectly honest. I think that, for me, Dobby and the house elves in general needed to be a little bit more relatable. And I think, if we're trying to get the message across that slavery is not good, then I really don't think we want wacky, irritating slaves, because I think that's sending the wrong message. So the second film, the acting has improved, so notably from Potter himself, Daniel Radcliffe. It was pretty limited in the first film. It was safe. In this one, unfortunately, Ron becomes more of that sort of scaredy cat thing, with Rupert Grint saying, "Harry!" He does in various irritating... He pulls this face, and in this high-pitched tone, he just sort of does his best, terrified, and then the wind change kind of facial expression thing. But to be fair to him, I think it's almost certainly Chris Columbus's fault that he's been told to do that sort of wacky, I'm scared kind of stuff. I think also in terms of the plot that there's some really interesting and promising stuff in there. So, for example, Harry speaks to the snake, and I'm going along with it, and it's actually, it's getting quite exciting. But then, unfortunately, I think it all gets pulled down a little bit by a plodding and uninteresting plot. So we see the gang up, they disguise themselves as Crabbe and Goyle, I think they're called, two of the baddies, Malfoy's henchmen, to get some information out of Malfoy. And it's supposed to be comic, but it's, to me, Columbus just botches it. It's completely mishandled. The narrative isn't tight enough, and it just comes across as lazy and uninteresting. I mean, it's sort of that kind of, you like Harry Potter, you must like this, but actually it's just not very well shot. The film's at great pains to explain and really sort of underline the link between Harry and Voldemort, and the films are absolutely right to do so. However, I think that I would have preferred to see Harry and Voldemort as two sides of the same coin. Very similar to Batman and Bane in the new Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. And it's sort of nodded at later, but I think it should have been handled with a little bit more flair early on, because there are some very skilled actors in there, and I think that they, without reading the source material, it's difficult to tell, but I very much suspect that a better fist could have been made. So overall, I mean, the second one is much improved on the first one. But some of the... I mean, I have actually said I'm happy with the exposition overall in the films, or the lack of. Unfortunately, in the first two, there is exposition, particularly in the first one, and some of that still remains in the second one. So, for example, with the basilisk, we had Tom Riddle said something like, "Your bird may have blinded the basilisk, however, I can still hear you." Or it was something like that, and you think, well, okay, we just sort of saw that. I mean, if the director has got to explain what just happened in the film, then he's not doing his job properly. So it is the last film that Columbus directed. He made this and basically bailed out. I think he blamed stress or something along those lines. But I, to be honest, I think it's just a case of a man knowing his own limitations. And I mean, he's the guy that directed Home Alone. I think he just doesn't have, bless him, the talent and the intellect to manage multiple plot twists or themes at the same time. So I think he struggles. So he's had a very successful career, but if you look at the body of his work, it's very much, directing by the numbers, doing relatively simple stuff, albeit largely successful. He's not Christopher Nolan, and he's not going to be. And he gets out of Harry Potter before he gets found out, to me, quite frankly, and that's fine and good on him. Spoiler alert, at the end of this film, I did not get the ending, actually, in a sense. Malfoy Senior basically attempts to do away with Harry Potter. Dobby, the CGI house elf, then saves Harry. Now, for this sort of act of attempted murder of one of the kids, there are precisely no repercussions. So for this adult. So does Harry mention it to Dumbledore? Does it make any kind of sense that he would not have mentioned it? Is it Chris Columbus's fault? Is it J.K. Rowling's fault? I didn't get it. I mean, I'm sure that people listening might think, oh yeah, well that's obvious. That's because da 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 da. I don't know. I just watched the film. Speaking of which, mind you, as a special treat, the kids at the end of this film, they get their exams cancelled. Kids have nearly died. I can't imagine the fees are cheap. Where's the PTA? Where's Ofsted? Clearly, this is not on.